Om Namo Narayana. Welcome back. I feel like I should rename this channel Reading in My Kitchen or something like that, because it seems from the earliest days where I was kind of doing this in my living room, I have now defaulted to the kitchen. And it's such a whatever kitchen, I just feel like I should give it some honor. It's so not scenic behind me, I'm well aware of that, but it's a good space. Thank you for coming to the least professional reading videos. Today we are going to be doing the Maitrayani Upanishad. This is a 4-part thing, but we're going to do all 4 parts today. And so, yeah, let's dive right into Upanishads in the kitchen. Upanishads from the kitchen. No, never mind. We'll leave that one alone. Part 1. The king Brihadratha, setting up his eldest son as king, deeming the body to be impermanent, getting detachment, went to the forest. He performed great penance and stood looking at the sun, arms lifted. At the end of 1,000 years, the sage Sakayana approached him, like fire without smoke, burning with his luster, and said, "O king, arise and choose a boon." The king bowed and said, "Sir, I am ignorant of the self. You know it. Please impart it." The sage said, "This has happened in the past and is impossible. Ask for other desires." But the king touched his feet and said, "Sir, what is the use of enjoyment in this body which smells badly and is a mass of bones and skin and all that, attacked by lust and anger and all sorts of emotions, and is feeling separation from near and dear people and hunger and thirst? We see that all this is decaying like flies and mosquitoes which live and die. Great kings before me, better than me, have relinquished this world and went to the other, even as relatives were watching. We also see how the asuras and yakshas and others are dead and gone. The oceans become dry, mountains fall, the Ruva star is shaken, trees and earth uprooted. There is only rebirth in this world after all the enjoyment. You should lift me up. You should uplift me, who am like a frog in a dark well. You are my refuge." The sage, being very pleased, said, "O king, the ornament of the Ikshvaku dynasty, you know the self, have done your duty, famous as the son of King Marut. This, indeed, is your self." "Which, O Lord?" the king asked. The sage replied, "It cannot be described. This one, bound by external causes, going upward, suffering, and yet not really suffering, dispels ignorance like the sun dispelling darkness. The tranquil one, rising from this body and approaching the supreme, manifests itself in its own essence, immortal, fearless. This Brahman Vidya has been imparted to us by Lord Maitreya. I shall teach you the same." The sinless, powerfully radiant and chaste Balakiyas spoke to Prajapati, "Lord, this body is inert like a cart, which subtle being has such greatness that the body is set up as a conscious thing. Who is the driver of this body?" Prajapati told them, "He who is beyond speech is pure, holy, empty of delusion, placid, breathless, independent, endless, unchangeable, eternal, unborn, free in his own glory. He is the driver." They said, "How can this body be set up like this by one who is devoid of desire?" He replied, "The self is subtle, non-object, invisible, and called Purusha. In part he is consciously present here and awakens the sleeper. That conscious part of this Purusha is the knower of the body in every individual. His marks are imagination, determination, and conceit. He is the Lord of creatures, the eye of all. By that conscious being is the body set up. He is the driver. Lord, how can such a being exist in part? This Prajapati was there in the beginning. Being alone, he was not happy. He contemplated on himself and made numerous beings. They were unaware of him, breathless, inert like a post. He was not happy and thought to himself, to kindle their awareness, I shall enter into them. Making himself like the air, he entered, not as one, but making himself fivefold, prana, apana, vyana, udana, and samana airs. The breath that moves upward is prana. Apana moves down. Samana is that which causes the eaten food to settle and circulates it to every limb equally. Udana throws up and sends down the drink and food. That which pervades the nerves is Vyana. The Vaishvanara wind overpowers the Antayami wind and vice versa. In between these two, warmth is exuded. The warmth is the spirit. Spirit is cosmic fire. Also, this has been stated elsewhere. The fire within is the cosmic fire, the inner fire by which food is digested. The sound of digestion is heard with closed ears, not when one is about to die. This Supreme Being, dividing himself into five, established in the heart, is all mental. His body is the vital breath. He has many forms. His imaginations are true. Standing in the core of his heart, he strives and thinks, let me become all things. Uprisen, dividing things by five rays, he experiences them. The sense organs are the rays, the motor organs are the horses, the body the chariot, the mind is the driver of the nature of Prakriti. Driving with the whip, he makes the body revolve like a wheel. Due to him is the body a conscious entity. This self is truly led to depend on the non-self by the fruit of actions. White and dark is overwhelmed, as it were, by them, and flits from body to body, being unmanifest, subtle, invisible, non-object, unpossessive, free from states, non-agent, but abides like an agent. He is truly pure, steadfast, immutable, untarnished, uneager, desireless, abiding as witness, experiences fruits of action, is loved by a sheet of Prakriti. Part 3. They asked, O Lord, who then is the other self, overwhelmed by the white and dark fruits of actions, and goes to wombs, good and bad, who goes down or up, wandering, overcome by dualities? He replied, there is indeed another self in elements, overwhelmed by actions, white and dark. Elements means the 5 root elements, as well as the 5 concrete elements. Their complex is the body. The self is like a drop of water in the lotus leaf. This is overwhelmed by Prakriti. Being overcome, he is in a state of delusion, and does not see the Lord himself making him act. Content with the mass of constituents and confused, unsteady, in eager pursuit, smitten by desire, yearning, conceited, thinking, I am that, this is mine, he binds himself by himself, as in a net he roams about. Elsewhere also it has been said, the agent indeed is the elemental self. The inner spirit causes actions by means of instruments, just as iron pervaded by fire and beaten by workers is split into many, so the elemental self, pervaded by the inner spirit and pressed by Prakriti, becomes many. The group of 3 aspects, assuming the forms of 84 lakhs of living beings, constitutes the mass of elemental beings. This is the form of plurality. The constituents are impelled by the spirit as a wheel by its driver. As the fire is not beaten, only the iron is, so the elemental self and not the spirit is overpowered. It has been stated that this body without consciousness has been generated by the sex act. It is hell. Has, via the urinary passage, sustained by bones, covered with flesh and skin, filled with feces, urine, etc. It is a shattered sheath. It has been affirmed. Delusion, fear, depression, sleep, wound, old age, etc. being full of these tamasa and rajasa traits, like desire, the elemental self is overwhelmed. Hence, indeed, it is inevitably assumes different forms. Part 4. It has been said, as waves in a great river, the past deeds are one safeguard. Like the coastline for the ocean, rebirth is unavoidable, bound by good and bad results of actions, as a beast by ropes. Like a prisoner, one in the clutches of death is not free, dwells in the midst of many fears. He who is maddened by worldly pleasures is like one intoxicated. He is in the grip of sin and roams, like one bitten by a snake. He is in the jaws of danger, as in darkness one is blinded by passion. As caught in a magic show, one is in the midst of Maya. He sees everything wrongly as in a dream, essence less like the pith of plantain, like an actor dressed up for a moment, falsely attractive like a painted wall. It has been stated sense objects like sound are there, sources of trouble. Attached to them, the self forgets the supreme plane. The remedy is the winning of knowledge. Following one's own dharma, one's law of life supports all like a tree trunk. By this law does one go upwards. Without it one tumbles down. This has been laid down in the Vedas. A transmission of the law cannot really be in the ashrama stage of life. One who is in the ashrama is said to be a real ascetic. It has also been said, by penance is sattva got, and by sattva is the refined mind. By mind is the spirit got, and by the spirit attained does transmigration stop. The following verses are relevant. Just as fire without dual dies in its own source, so the mind, by the dying of its modes, calms down in the source. The modes of mind withdrawn, of the lover of truth, not deceived by sense objects, are false. They follow laws of action. Migrating life is mind indeed. Take pains to purge it well. What the mind dwells on, that fills one's life, this is the everlasting mystery. With the purged mind fixed on the self, one fears on endless bliss. If the mind attached to sense objects is fixed upon the Supreme Spirit, who will not be liberated? Mind is of two kinds. The impures, filled with desires, the pures without them. When a person makes his mind free from dissolution and restlessness, reaches the mindless state, it is the high place. The mind is to be restrained only so long as it is not dissolved in the heart. This is knowledge, and release too. Rest is mere details. The joy got by the mind, which is purified by samadhi and fixed upon the spirit, cannot be described by words, but grasped only by the mind. Water mixed in water cannot be distinguished, so also fire and sky. So the mind, spirit, man is freed. Mind is the only cause of bondage and liberation. Attached to objects, it gives bondage. Without them, liberation. You are Brahma, Vishnu, Rudra, Prajapati, Agni, Varuna, Vayu, Indra, Moon, Manu, Yama, Bhuma, Akyuta. In heaven you dwell in your own self in many ways. I bow to you, the Lord of all, the soul of all, the doer of allocations, protector of all. An illusion, all sport are you. The placid in nature, the most secret, beyond thought and knowledge, without beginning and end. It was all tamas. Then impelled by the Supreme, it became uneven. Rajas compelled becomes uneven. This all came out of sattva, the conscious being, in every person indicated by thought, determination, and conceit. Prajapati spoke about it. The first bodies are Brahman, etc. He is the aspects of tamas, Rudra of sattva. Vishnu became threefold, eightfold, etc., unlimited, and moves among the creatures, the support of all creatures, and their Lord, inside and outside them. So ends this Upanishad. I must apologize, I had to cut and splice that because I kept reading lines that they're just not well written. They're just they're just awkward to read. And like, so for example, in the very first line in this, the king Brihadratha, setting up the eldest son as king, deeming the body to be impermanent, getting detachment, went to the forest. To say getting detachment, comma, went to the forest after what came before, it doesn't work. And there's other lines like this, and I'm just like, and I kept messing up. So my apologies. A lot of these Upanishads really need help, and I don't know if it's just the person who translated them. So the person who translates these out of Sanskrit, I believe, is trying to get the most accurate version of them. This is what it says. But to turn it into English makes it very cumbersome and very hard to read. And so it's that catch-22 in translation. Like, sometimes you need to change something in order to make it work. There was something I was reading, and it was interesting. At the very end of it says there's verses relevant to this. And I read that so much when I was doing the Kama Sutra on this channel. Oh my gosh, it was mind-numbing how often, here are some verses relevant. Which is obviously citing an earlier source. Who knows what that source is? Or citing an earlier teacher or something. And to read it now, a thought came to me. We do the same thing today. How often do you pick up just a normal book, a non-fiction book, and someone will say, according to this teacher, blah, 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 and then it cites. And that's what they're doing here. They just kind of don't give the teacher, they don't do the citations very well. Anyways, this Upanishad to me felt very much like a repetition of things we've seen elsewhere. I don't really have much to say about it. It didn't really thrill me, and it was such a cumbersome thing to read. But I will say one thing. I saw someone online the other day who was very ignorant. They said Christianity and Hinduism are the same because God breathed into Adam, and here we see, God breathing and you breathe God, so it's the same. No, it's not the same, people. It is not the same, and this text kind of shows that. So in Christianity, God fashioned Adam out of dirt, and there wasn't anything here. There wasn't anything happening. It was like a statue. Breathed into Adam and gave him life. But here we clearly read that there were creatures created by God who had life. They were existing and the world was happening without any breath of God needed. God put his breath into them to give them something more than the materialistic thing they had. But the breath did not... here it is. To kindle their awareness, I shall enter into them. But they had life. And they weren't zombies. They were living. They just weren't living for something bigger. So, if you talk about the breath of life in Christianity, that is a completely different thing than here in Hinduism. It's not the same. Universalism, I'm sorry, if you're going to try to do a comparison, don't twist what one religion says. And that's clearly what this argument does, is it twists what Hinduism says to make this into the breath of life, when this is more like a breath of sort of awareness, a breath of spirituality. Anyways, that thought came to me as I was reading it. So I'm going to let this Upanishad lie here, and you can comment on it if you'd like. And thank you for watching. Thank you for putting up with me as I stumble through some of these sentences. But if you're hanging out to the end, and you're willing to learn, and you're interested in this stuff like I am, and so you're digesting it, even if it's a tough swallow. With that, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare.